Alright, for this video I'm going to be talking about overcoming addictions to temporary pleasures by practicing moderation, plus my version of monk mode. In my previous video, I talked about how my version of monk mode has helped me have peace. I didn't go into as much detail as I would have liked to. I also didn't have the video as organized as I would have liked it to have been. So, in this video, I'm going to attempt to go back over some of the things from the previous video in a way that is more organized and is relevant to this video. So this video is meant to be some sort of a continuation off of the previous video, but this video is not intended to be a part 2. This video is meant to be something different enough from the previous video for me to label it as its own thing. I had a lot of trouble making this video because I was really tired last night and I forgot some very important things and I kept losing my train of thought and I kept repeating myself too many times, and I had recorded up to around, I think, 35 minutes of footage, and then I was about to upload it, and then I realized that I had forgotten to include details about my personal experience, and I realized that that was very important for me to include in the video, so I decided to scrap what I had already had and start over. However, I used the notes that I had to make the notes that I'm using for this video. And so, I'm hoping that this video will work out like I want it to. I'm going to try to make this video not take as long as my previous failed attempt at making this video. And I actually had another failed attempt at making this video before that was about 10 minutes long, I think. So I've spent a long amount of time trying to make this video. And I've learned that in order to have an easier time with making videos, I need to spend more time trying to organize my notes better. That way, when I make my video, I am less likely to lose my train of thought as much. Either way, I'm still going to lose my train of thought, and I'm still going to have long pauses here and there, and I'm still going to speak slowly at times because of overlapping thoughts making me shift my focus. So, anyways, I didn't like how the previous video turned out, but I decided to keep it because it has a lot to do with this video And so I decided it was a good idea for me to keep it because it provides more context, I guess, that explains how I got to this video. Anyways, moving on to the main point of this video, the quitting cold turkey method to overcoming addictions does not work for me, so I practice moderation instead. The reason that the quitting cold turkey method to overcoming addictions does not work for me is because I end up having to use so much energy in order to cut certain things out of my life, and I have to use so much willpower. And then when I run out of that energy, and when I run out of that willpower, I end up having relapses, meaning I return back to whatever it is that I was doing that I wanted to stop doing. And then I end up having to experience feelings of guilt and self-hate, and I end up feeling like a failure. And then I feel like it wastes my time, and then I keep trying it over and over again and failing, and as I fail more and more, it seems to get worse rather than better. So I decided that I needed to figure out another strategy besides using the quitting cold turkey method. So I eventually learned about moderation, and so I've been practicing moderation. And what moderation is finding balance in the things you allow yourself to do and enjoy. And when you're practicing moderation, you try to avoid extremes, not only thinking in extremes, but acting in extremes. You try to avoid doing too much of something or too little of something. And how moderation may look for different people can vary greatly. Different people can handle different amounts of things responsibly, and some people might need to do the quitting cold turkey method because some people may have so much trouble with something being present in their life that they may have no choice but to cut it out of their life. However, I think the majority of people need to practice moderation for the majority of things. But for people that moderation may not work for them because of something having a very negative impact on their life, they may need to use the quitting cold turkey method to remove that addiction from their life. However, I have had to remove certain things from my life using the quitting cold turkey method, but the majority of things that I become addicted to, I have to use the moderation method instead. because the majority of things I have become addicted to, I have felt a need to still allow myself to have those things. However, there have been certain things that I've had to completely cut out of my life because they have had not much value to me in the long run, and I thought it was better to cut those things out of my life, and I'll talk about that in more detail later. So, what I lacked in my previous attempt at making this video was examples of my personal experience. So that is what I want to talk about. I have struggled with certain addictions such as overeating, playing video games too much, watching too many self-help videos and not applying the knowledge obtained from them, and binge watching TV shows and movies. I have had those kinds of addictions in my life so far, and the reason that I consider those addictions to be temporary pleasures is because they stop providing pleasure eventually after they become addictions and you have overindulged in them for too long. And then it takes more of that thing in order to provide pleasure, and then eventually it gets to the point to where you cannot have enough of it to even get pleasure from it anymore, and at that point it ends up having such a negative impact on your life that you may have to completely cut it out of your life using the quitting cold turkey method to prevent yourself from getting harmed by it. However, if you can still experience some pleasure from it, then if it's something such as a video game or a TV show or something that's less dangerous in the physical sense, then you may want to use moderation. Instead, if you have still been able to experience some pleasure from it, because you may actually need that thing to still be somewhat present in your life. You just may need to not experience that thing as much. In other words, you may need to stop overindulging in that thing. I want to go into more detail about these kinds of addictions that I've had to deal with throughout my life so far. So, I've already talked about, or at least I think I have already talked about, my problem with overeating in one of my previous videos, and I have had struggles with depression throughout my life, and as one of the unhealthy coping mechanisms that I developed to try and be able to cope with my depression, I ended up overeating, and so eventually it got to the point to where I could barely get any pleasure from it because I was eating way too much, and it was making my life difficult. It was causing me lots of pain. It was taking up a lot of my time. It was taking up a lot of my energy because I had to force myself to keep eating that much food. And it also costed me a lot of money. It also made both my physical and mental health get worse. So I realized that I needed to not eat as much, but because it was food and I had to continue eating food so that I could survive, I had to slowly over time eat less food, because I was afraid that if I stopped eating that much food in a very short period of time, that it could hurt me. So I decided to slowly decrease the amount of food I was eating until I found an amount of food that I was comfortable with that seemed to work out well for me. And I had a lot of trial and error over the period of about, I think, 2 to 3 years maybe, that I was trying to figure out what a balanced diet would look like for me and what worked well for me and my health. And so that took me a lot of time to figure out not only how much of which things I needed to eat, but I also had to figure out which things I would avoid and how I would make strict rules for myself to prevent me from returning to overeating. And I have had relapses. However, I have tried to make rules for myself as reasonable as I could come up with, and I try to account for exceptions for when extra food or less food may be needed at times. And I've also had to account for things such as when I am sick or times that I don't have much of an appetite. There's so many things I've had to account for, and it's been a long and difficult process, but that's how things are, and I've just had to remain persistent in trying to improve my health. And another kind of addiction that I've struggled a lot with has been playing video games too much, either playing video games in general too much or playing the same game too much. And I've had issues with me losing interest in whatever video games that I've been playing a lot, because I have been burnt out as a result of overindulging in them to the point that playing them felt like work. And games that involve a lot of grinding and limited time or time-gated events things like that became overwhelming to me very easily and felt like a job. So I had to learn how to practice moderation. I had to figure out my priorities, figure out what I wanted to do for fun, figured out what I wanted to learn about, what I was curious about, what I wanted to help out other people with, and I had to figure out which things I needed to cut out in order to allow myself to have a better experience with playing those video games. And I had to figure out what things I wanted to allow myself to enjoy without overindulging. And I had to learn to allow myself to try out new things. And as a result of me allowing myself to try out new things, I was able to have new friendships. I was able to make new friends and learn things from them. I have already talked about, I think I've already talked about me taking long breaks away from Warframe, but that is my favorite game, and I've had issues with overindulging in it in that game. I've had a lot of issues with becoming addicted to playing that game in the past, and so I've had many times where I've had to take time away from it and figure out what things were important to me in that game and which things I was no longer interested in doing so that it wouldn't feel as much like a job. And I've also had an addiction to watching a lot of self-help videos. In the past, I've had times where I didn't feel like doing much of anything except for getting on YouTube and watching videos, and a lot of the videos that were recommended to me were self-help videos, and I ended up watching a lot of them and not applying what I learned. And so at that point, most of those videos ended up being a waste of my time unless I account for those videos potentially leading me to other videos that were of use to me that I did apply. But I try to make sure that what I am doing has a purpose, that it has a use to me, and I try to organize what I learn in my mind in the hopes that I might be able to apply it at some point. I've also had problems with binge watching TV shows and movies. I've learned that I've been overwhelmed by how many TV shows and movies I became interested in and became overwhelmed by them because I was afraid that I would not be able to finish them all during my lifetime, so I had to figure out what my priorities were. And I ended up trying to come up with a schedule for when I would watch TV shows and movies and when I would play video games, but then I ended up mostly playing video games. And I don't know when I might return to watching TV shows and movies again. But anyways, I want to move on to the next thing I'd like to talk about. Pleasure derived from overindulgence in worldly things is temporary. Like I already said, if you overindulge in something too much, eventually it no longer provides pleasure. overindulging in worldly pleasures cannot fill the void in your life. What I mean by the void in your life is a feeling that something is missing, a feeling that you need something in your life to improve the quality of your life, whether it be something small or big. And I've often had to deal with being stuck with a feeling that something is always missing, that I never have enough time, that I'm forgetting something, that I can never seem to get enough. And then I realized that me being stuck with the voids in my life being left unfilled, I realized that the reason for that was because I was seeking out the wrong things to try and fill those voids in my life. And I realized that I was seeking out those temporary pleasures and trying to use those to fill in the voids in my life. And then I realized that no matter how hard I tried, that those temporary pleasures could not fill in those voids, because if I tried to use them to fill in the voids, they would become addictions, and eventually they would stop providing me pleasure. And so I realized that my friendships and contributing to something greater than myself is what helps me to fill the voids in my life. And I already talked about something in my notes before I read it in my notes, so I'm going to have to try to figure out what I wanted to talk about next. Oh, okay, how my quality of life has improved since I've been practicing moderation. Well, let's see. Not only have I overcame a lot of those addictions that I talked about that I've struggled with in the past, my mental and physical health has improved, my memory has improved, and even though I still have struggles with depression and occasional relapses with some of those addictions, I overall am able to focus more and have more time to do things that I want to do rather than wasting away the time seeking pleasure. Now, I'm not saying that seeking pleasure is entirely a bad thing, because pleasure is necessary. However, if you overindulge in it, then it becomes an addiction. But anyways, I've also had feelings of security and stability. I've had more confidence. I have my strengths have gotten stronger, and some of my weaknesses have not been as weak. I don't know if that's the correct way to say that, but hopefully there won't be a misunderstanding about that. Anyways, my version of monk mode involves this list of things that I've written out: meditating, blocking out distractions, focusing on your goals, practicing moderation, that brings to mind a quote, "Everything in moderation. Give your life meaning. Give yourself a sense of purpose and direction. And fill the void in your life." I have a lot more written in my notes, and I didn't realize how long this video was going to last or take. So I realize now that I'm going to have to make a part 2, even though I didn't want to have to make a part 2. So that's it for this video. Peace.